Hello. Hako forti. Everyone, today I want to talk about something simple but powerful. Don't let people know too much about you. We live in a world where people rush to post, to share, to explain. But in doing so, we forget one thing: mystery has power. When people don't know everything about you, they treat you with a certain level of respect. Curiosity keeps them guessing, and that space gives you strength. Think about it. Not everyone needs to know your plans, your struggles, or your next move. Because let's be honest, not everyone who listens is wishing you well. Some are collecting information, not to support you, but to control, compete. And there's something strong in silence. Privacy is not secrecy, it's strategy. You don't owe the world a full version of your life. What you choose to share should be intentional, not emotional. Let your actions speak. Let your results be your response. You don't need to explain yourself when your work is clear. And when people can't figure you out easily, they respect your boundaries, even if they don't understand them. And remember, when people know less about your journey, they can't judge your growth too early. You're free to evolve, free to change your mind, free to start again, without an audience watching your every step. So guard your story. Speak when it matters. Share with those who earn the right to hear your truth. Because peace loves privacy and strength often lives in what's unspoken. In a world where people constantly seek attention, where every thought, every meal, and every moment is broadcast online, there is something rare and powerful about being a little mysterious. When you don't reveal everything about yourself, you create a kind of invisible boundary that others naturally respect. It's not about hiding, it's about holding space for yourself. And that space, where not everyone knows what you're thinking, feeling, or planning, becomes a source of quiet strength. Mystery builds respect because it makes people pause. It invites curiosity without giving away control. When you're always talking about yourself, explaining your reasons, or defending your choices, you give others the power to define you. But when you remain calm, deliberate, and measured in what you share, you shift the dynamic. You go from being someone who needs to be understood to someone who demands to be considered. We tend to respect what we can't easily figure out. Think of people you've admired from a distance. The ones who say little, move quietly, yet seem to have a strong presence. That's not an accident. It's intentional. They understand that if people know too much about your life, they begin to devalue it. The more you speak, the more you risk being misinterpreted or reduced to someone's assumptions. But when you hold something back, your plans, your fears, your inner workings, you keep control of your image, your influence, and your narrative. Mystery doesn't mean being cold or distant. It means being intentional. It's choosing not to be an open book just because everyone else is. It's knowing that not everyone deserves access to your private thoughts or your personal journey. Some parts of you are sacred, and when you protect them, you build a sense of depth that others naturally respect, even if they don't fully understand it. So the next time you feel the urge to explain yourself, to prove a point, or to be fully known, pause and ask, what do I gain by sharing this? And what do I lose? Because often, the less people know about you, the more they want to know. And in that quiet distance, you gain something rare: dignity, control, and respect. There is a quiet kind of power that lives in privacy. It's not loud, it doesn't need validation, and it doesn't seek attention. It simply exists, strong and steady behind the scenes. When you choose to keep certain aspects of your life to yourself, your goals, your relationships, your struggles, you are not being secretive. You are being strategic. You are preserving your energy, your focus, and most importantly, your control. You see, the more people know about you, the more access they have to your life. And access is influence. When too many people know your business, they begin to feel entitled to your path. They offer opinions, judgments, advice you never asked for. And suddenly, you're no longer moving on your own terms. You're reacting to noise, constantly justifying your decisions, and second-guessing your instincts. That's not power. That's distraction. Privacy shields you from this chaos. It allows you to operate with clarity because you're not performing for an audience. You're not trying to prove anything to anyone. You're simply doing the work quietly, intentionally, and with full ownership of your journey. And in that quiet, something powerful happens. Your confidence grows. Not the kind that needs applause, but the kind that's rooted in self-trust. The kind that says, I don't need to announce my every move because I know where I'm going. Another thing to remember is that not everyone has pure intentions. Some people smile, nod, and listen, not because they care, but because they're collecting information. Information they may later use against you, twist into gossip, or compare with their own lives. When your life is too visible, it becomes a stage for others to project their envy, their judgment, or their insecurities. And often those projections can plant seeds of doubt in your own mind. Privacy then is a form of protection. It keeps your peace intact. It creates a boundary between your inner world and the outer noise. It gives you time to build without being watched, to fail without being judged, and to grow without constant commentary. When your power is private, it's harder to attack and harder to manipulate. You move like a shadow, unpredictable, focused, and hard to stop. Ultimately, power that is seen can be challenged, but power that is private is preserved. When you guard your privacy, you guard your ability to stay grounded, resilient, and in control of your own story. It's a hard truth, but one that must be faced. Not everyone who smiles at you, listens to you, or offers advice truly has your best interests at heart. In a perfect world, we could speak freely, share openly, and trust easily. But in reality, the more you expose about yourself, your plans, your weaknesses, your private experiences, the more vulnerable you become to people who don't wish you well. Some people aren't curious about your life because they care. There is an unmistakable strength in a person who lets their actions do the talking. In a world saturated with noise, opinions, declarations, promises, and self-promotion, it's often the quiet doer, the person who moves without making announcements, who commands the most respect. When you act instead of talk, you shift the focus from what you say you'll do to what you actually achieve. People often rush to speak about their intentions. They announce their goals, their next move, their ambitions. They explain their worth in words, hoping others will believe in them based on promises or potential. But here's the truth. Words are easy to say. They require no sacrifice, no discipline, and no risk. Action, on the other hand, demands effort. It takes time, patience, consistency, and it speaks volumes without needing a single sentence. When you do the work quietly and let the results show themselves, you create a different kind of presence. One rooted not in attention-seeking, but in substance. People start noticing not because you told them to, but because they can't ignore what you've built, how you carry yourself, or what you've overcome. That kind of impact lasts longer than any speech, caption, or explanation ever could. Another reason why letting your actions speak is powerful is that it disarms those who wish to criticize or doubt you. If you speak too soon, people will often look for ways to challenge your words, to test your promises, or to diminish your value before you've even begun. But when you move silently, when you keep your intentions close and your work focused, There is nothing for them to tear apart because they never saw it coming. They can't interfere with a plan they didn't know existed. There's also a deeper peace that comes with this mindset. When you're no longer trying to convince anyone of your value, when you stop trying to explain or justify your journey, you begin to free yourself from external expectations. You stop performing. You start living. You work with clarity because you're not doing it for applause or approval. You're doing it because it's who you are. And that authenticity makes your actions more meaningful. Sometimes the loudest people in the room are the ones doing the least. They rely on noise to fill the silence where real work should be. But the people who achieve quietly often surprise others with their growth, their progress, their resilience. And that surprise? That's the impact of silent effort. No need to announce it. No need to boast. Just results that speak for themselves. So whether it's your goals, your healing, your personal transformation, or your success, let them see it when it's real, not when it's in the idea stage. The more you act, the less you need to explain. Because when the work is done right, it speaks louder than any words ever could. One of the most dangerous truths about human behavior is how quickly people form opinions. Sometimes it takes only a few seconds, a single sentence, or a moment of vulnerability for someone to label you, box you in, or reduce your entire story to a headline in their mind. Well, people don't always wait for context, for explanation, or for the full picture. They often jump to conclusions. And once they've decided who they think you are, it's hard to change their perception. This is why sharing too much too soon can backfire. It feels natural to want to be understood, to open up, to be real, to be seen for who you truly are. But the reality is that not everyone is ready or willing to understand the depth of your journey. Instead of hearing your story with empathy, some people will hear it with judgment. They will take what you share and measure it against their own insecurities, assumptions, or narrow mindset. And once that judgment is made, it can follow you even if it's completely false. What's worse is that people tend to remember what you reveal during your low moments more than what you accomplished during your high ones. You could be growing, evolving, healing, but to them, you'll always be the person who once said something insecure, made a mistake, or showed weakness. That one detail you shared in vulnerability becomes their reference point, and suddenly you're no longer in control of your own narrative. They are. People also judge based on fragments. You might tell them one piece of your story, maybe out of trust, or maybe just in conversation. And instead of holding that piece respectfully, they build an entire story around it. A story that may have nothing to do with your truth. They fill in gaps with their own biases. They make assumptions, they compare, and they pass those assumptions on to others. Before long, you find yourself misunderstood in a room of people who were never supposed to know your story in the first place. It's important to understand that judgment doesn't always come from a place of cruelty. It often comes from limitation. People judge what they don't understand. They criticize what makes them uncomfortable. They mock what threatens their worldview. So when you give people too much of your inner world, you risk placing your complex reality into the hands of someone who can't, or won't, handle it with care. This is why self-protection is not selfish. It's wisdom. Keeping certain thoughts, experiences, or dreams to yourself allows you to grow without being boxed in by others' premature opinions. It gives you the freedom to evolve without having to constantly explain your changes to people who already decided who you were based on incomplete information. So before you speak, pause. Before you share, assess the environment. Ask yourself, is this person listening to understand? or are they listening to judge? Because once the words are out, once the details are exposed, they cannot be taken back. And unfortunately, in the hands of the wrong person, they might not be treated with fairness or respect. At first, it might seem like a contradiction. How can setting limits lead to more freedom? But in truth, boundaries are not walls that keep people out. They are gates that let the right things in while keeping the wrong things out. And when it comes to your personal life, your peace and your sense of direction, having boundaries is one of the most liberating decisions you can make. When you don't set boundaries, when you allow people unrestricted access to your thoughts, your time, your emotions, you eventually lose your sense of control. Your life starts to revolve around other people's expectations, their questions, their opinions. You feel pulled in different directions, and over time, you become more reactive than intentional. You share not because you want to, but because you feel obligated to. You explain not because it's necessary, but because you feel pressured to justify yourself. That isn't freedom. That's emotional entanglement. But when you establish clear boundaries, when you decide what parts of your life are private, who earns your trust, and how much of yourself you're willing to share, you take back your power. You create a safe space within your own life where your energy is protected, your focus is sharp, and your sense of peace isn't constantly interrupted by outside noise. You stop living to please or perform, and you start living to be true to yourself. One of the most misunderstood things about boundaries is that they are not meant to push people away. They're meant to draw the line between what's healthy and what's harmful. When you share too much, too often with too many people, you risk emotional exhaustion. You find yourself explaining your every move, defending your choices, and feeling guilty when others don't approve. But with boundaries, you can choose silence without shame. You can say, "This isn't something I want to talk about," and feel no need to explain further. Boundaries also give you room to grow. When fewer people are inside your inner circle, you have space to evolve without the weight of their constant observation. You can change your mind, start over, make mistakes, and learn privately. You get to own your journey without the burden of an audience. And that kind of personal space, it's where the real transformation happens. Growth requires stillness, clarity, and protection from the chaos of unsolicited feedback and misunderstanding. What's powerful is that once people recognize your boundaries, they begin to respect you more. When you are not easily accessed, you are valued more deeply. People begin to approach you more carefully, more respectfully, because they understand that your openness is a choice, not a default setting. You teach them how to treat you by how you protect your space. So, rather than fearing isolation or rejection, understand that boundaries are a form of self-love. They give you the freedom to be who you are without compromise. They make room for meaningful connection rather than shallow familiarity. And most importantly, they remind you that your life doesn't belong to everyone. It belongs to you. In a world where everyone is speaking, reacting, and responding instantly, silence has become one of the most underused but most powerful tools a person can possess. Silence is not weakness. It's not confusion. It's not submission. Silence is strategy. It is composure. It is control. It is control. When you choose not to reveal too much about yourself, your thoughts, your plans, your emotions, you are choosing to stay in control of your environment and your power. When you speak too soon or too often, you give people access, not just to your words, but to your thoughts, your patterns, and your next move. And the more access they have, the more opportunity they have to interfere, to influence, or even to manipulate what they now understand about you. But when you hold back, when you listen more than you speak, observe more than you reveal, you maintain the advantage of surprise. People don't know what you're thinking, where you're going, or what motivates you, and that uncertainty protects you. Silence makes people pay closer attention. When you speak only when necessary, people lean in. They listen more carefully, not because you're louder than everyone else, but because you're selective. Your words carry more weight. Your decisions feel more deliberate, and your presence becomes harder to read and therefore harder to challenge. People can argue with your words. They can twist them, debate them, misinterpret them, but they can't fight what they don't know. They can't predict a move that hasn't been announced. They can't respond to a strategy that hasn't been shared. Silence also gives you time. Time to think before you act, to feel before you react, and to prepare before you speak. It allows you to process what's happening around you without pressure. When people rush into explaining or defending themselves, they often say things they later regret. But silence lets you observe how others behave when they think you're not reacting. It reveals their intentions. It shows you who is genuinely interested in your well-being and who is merely trying to extract information or stir conflict. In emotionally charged situations, silence becomes a shield. When someone is trying to provoke you, bait you into reacting, or pressure you into revealing something you're not ready to share, your silence keeps you grounded. It tells them, I don't owe you a reaction. It says, I am in control of what enters and leaves my world. That kind of restraint is not easy, but it is powerful. Because once you master your silence, you stop letting people dictate your emotions, your words, or your next move. In fact, silence is a language in itself. It communicates confidence, patience, wisdom, and discipline. It tells the world that you are not desperate to be seen, not easily shaken, and not here to prove yourself through noise. You are here to move with purpose, and purpose does not always need to announce itself. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the deepest strength. There is something undeniably powerful about being a mystery. In a time when oversharing has become the norm, when people broadcast every detail of their lives across conversations and social media, choosing to remain private makes you stand out. It makes people pause, wonder, pay attention. Mystery creates space between who you are and what others think they know about you. In that space, respect begins to form. When people can't easily define you, they tend to approach you with more caution. They don't assume they've figured you out. They don't treat you casually or take your presence for granted. Instead, they are more likely to observe, to reflect, to think twice before making judgments. Why? Because mystery forces people to slow down and consider the possibility that there's more to you than meets the eye. And that subtle pause, that hesitation, is where respect lives. Being mysterious doesn't mean being distant or cold. It simply means you don't give everything away. You don't rush to explain yourself. You don't feel the need to share your every thought or emotion just to be understood. You allow people to know you in layers, over time, and only when they've earned the right to access deeper parts of you. That restraint, that self-possession, signals strength. It tells the world that your life is not an open book, but a carefully written story, one that not everyone gets to read. Mystery also changes the energy in a room. When people can't predict your next move, they can't control the narrative around you. You remain a step ahead, not because you're hiding, but because you're curating. You're intentional with what you share, who you trust, and how you present yourself. And that intention makes people take you more seriously. It builds a quiet kind of authority, one not based on dominance, but on intrigue. People respect what they can't easily access. They value what they have to earn. In relationships, whether personal or social, mystery creates stronger boundaries. It prevents others from becoming overly familiar too quickly. Familiarity, when unearned, often leads to disrespect. But when someone doesn't know your full story, when they can't anticipate your every move or emotion, they're more likely to approach you with care, with curiosity, and with a higher level of regard. Think about it. The most admired people in life are not always the loudest or the most visible. They are often the ones who leave you wondering what's on their mind, or what's their story. That curiosity isn't just interest. It's a form of quiet admiration. Because when you hold yourself with mystery, you don't just draw attention, you draw intentional attention. The kind that is measured, thoughtful, and less likely to turn into entitlement. Mystery also protects your peace. When no one knows exactly what motivates you, what you're working on, or how you truly feel, it becomes difficult for them to interfere. It becomes difficult for them to sabotage, compete, or manipulate because they don't have the full picture. You become unreadable, not because you're hiding, but because you're focused. And focus, when combined with mystery, creates a presence that others can't easily challenge. In the end, silence is not about secrecy. It's about sovereignty. It's about understanding that your life is not a stage for everyone to critique, consume, or comment on. It's a sacred space, one that deserves protection, intention, and privacy. When you choose to keep certain parts of yourself hidden, not out of fear, but out of wisdom, you gain something far more valuable than attention. You gain peace. You gain control. You gain the ability to grow, to move, and to transform without interruption. So guard your energy. Share wisely. Let your actions echo louder than your words. And never forget, the less people know, the less they can distort. Keep your power where it belongs, with you.